Senator Bernie Sanders wants the federal government to provide a $15 per hour job to every American who wants one. It's hard to overstate how silly this proposal is. Taxes could never be raised, and existing programs could never be cut enough to finance this policy at the level required. And the government could not possibly come up with enough jobs to satisfy its obligations under this plan. This cartoonish proposal is predicated in part on the notion that there are bad jobs, jobs that are beneath the dignity of what a reasonable person should expect from employment. It's true, of course, that many jobs are physically demanding and pay relatively little, but it's also true that work confers dignity and is virtuous. Flipping burgers for $10 an hour isn't a bad job. It's an opportunity to build skills and climb the employment ladder. It's an opportunity to provide for yourself and your family. It's an opportunity to make a contribution to your community and to society. All leaders should encourage work. Leaders shouldn't denigrate, even unintentionally, the jobs held by millions of hardworking Americans. That message is counterproductive. Messages matter.
The oldest division in the Muslim world is the Sunni-Shiite split. Downplaying its ecumenical approach towards spreading the Islamic Revolution, Tehran has now embraced Shiite supremacy. And Sunnis and Shiites from Lebanon to Afghanistan, Syria to Yemen are nearly equal in number. Iran has tens of thousands of foreign Shiites under the command of the Revolutionary Guards. Never in modern history have we seen a Muslim state, not the pan-Arabists of yesteryear or the ever-proselytizing Saudis, deploy such expeditionary forces into battle. Iranian Islamist imperialism, backed up by the ambitions and firepower of Vladimir Putin's Russia, now dominates the northern Middle East. It's only a matter of time before Tehran aims its convulsive intentions towards the Shiites of Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. United Nations conventional arms restrictions against Iran come off in 2020. The nuclear deal's restraints start falling in 2023. An Iranian Islamist hegemon is rising, and the United States is just watching. For a deeper understanding of the Iranian clerical regime's quest to dominate the Middle East, see the link to the book, The Rise of the Revisionists, in the description below.
China is the world's last remaining empire. Today, China is powerful enough to expand its imperial holdings and establish itself as the middle kingdom in Asia, as it was for most of its history. Its current leader, Xi Jinping, sees himself as a modern-day emperor. Under Xi, China will try to expand its maritime and territorial claims in the South and East China Seas and coerce Taiwan, the last holdout to Chinese so-called reunification. It will challenge U.S. primacy and the American-led security system in the Indo-Pacific. Given Chinese increased power and prestige, its ambitions are only growing. Xi believes he can achieve the long-held goal of national rejuvenation. Washington needs to establish a strategy that pushes back on Chinese expansionism and strengthens alliances with Asian partners. The goal of this strategy should be to force China to choose between expensive imperial expansionism or badly needed socioeconomic reform. To learn more about my take on Chinese imperialism, check the links to the book Rise of the Revisionists in the description below.
Is this too much? Gallup has been tracking American attitudes on global warming for more than 2 decades. In 1997, 48% nationally said that the effects of global warming had already begun. In Gallup's new March poll, 60% gave that response. Just 12% said that the effects would never happen. However, a majority in Gallup's new poll did not believe global warming would pose a serious threat to them during their lifetimes. That may be one reason why the issue ranks low when pollsters ask about top priorities for the President and Congress. In a January Pew survey, 46% said that global climate change should be a top priority. Of the 19 issues Pew asked about, climate change tied for second to last place. More people, 62%, said that protecting the environment should be a top priority. Terrorism outstripped both as a top priority at 73%. In Gallup's polling, the public worries more about environmental problems they can see in their own communities, such as the pollution of drinking water, than they worry about climate change.
America has celebrated Memorial Day for at least 150 years. It's a post-Civil War holiday that used to be called Decoration Day. The name morphed over time as the holiday grew post-World War I to commemorate all who have died in service to the country. Remembering our fallen soldiers is more than nostalgia. It's about re-engaging with the principles that define America. Because Memorial Day renews the memory of those who gave their lives that this nation might live, it reminds us that our nation is dedicated to liberty and equality. Our national cemeteries at Arlington and elsewhere make it a point to specify the individual names of fallen soldiers on those rows of headstones, to recognize the equal worthiness of each of its dead soldiers to be remembered by name. Not all democracies have done this. In ancient Athens, dead soldiers were nameless because it was only the city of Athens that was meant to be remembered. It matters how a government thinks of and treats its military dead, because it reveals how it thinks about citizens and government.
Vladimir Putin has set Russia on a collision course with America and the West. Putin sees Russians as heirs to a vast empire, an empire they lost with the fall of the Soviet Union. And the biggest obstacle to their restored greatness? The United States. So, Putin seeks to regain control of former Soviet states. He wants to create a world in which the US is just another country, rather than a global leader. To that end, he's driving a narrative that says, if the US was just cut down to size, Russia could regain its empire and once again be the defender of Europe and Christianity. In pursuit of his vision, Putin is creating a Hobbesian world of violence and lawlessness. His seizure of Crimea was illegal. His occupation of eastern Ukraine, again, illegal. Interference in US elections, illegal. Cyber attacks on Baltic countries, aggression. Deliberately bombing hospitals in Syria, that's a war crime. But Putin's Russia isn't the Soviet Union. Its economy is the size of Australia's. Its population is shrinking. We can resist Putin's aggression, and we must. To learn more about my take on Russia, check the link to the book Rise of the Revisionists in the description below.
"87% of Americans think it's appropriate to require physically able people to seek work in order to receive public benefits, and generally, most government aid recipients do. Yet critics call work requirements for safety net programs cruel, believing they punish people for being poor. The truth is, work requirements are not punishment. They ensure that people who are capable of work stay connected to the labor market. Most states do this with people receiving unemployment compensation, and they should be doing it with safety net programs too. Requiring work sends a clear message that if you can work, you should be working, while government assistance is there to support you. It also fulfills a kind of social contract that most poor people agree with. In a poll conducted in 2016, 8 of 10 Americans in poverty agreed with work requirements. Most of all, work requirements improve the integrity of our safety net programs. Anti-poverty programs do much better when they are perceived as a way to help people move out of poverty through work, rather than simply a means to make unemployment more tolerable.
Ethanol has been a matter of intense debate and lobbying for decades, thanks to the government support it enjoys. Currently, the Renewable Fuel Standard, or RFS, requires refiners to blend ethanol into their gasoline. This drives up prices at the pump, but also at the grocery store because it diverts cropland from food production to fuel production. Ranchers complain about the effect on feed prices. Environmentalists object to ethanol's effect on groundwater and greenhouse gas emissions. But the ethanol industry is politically strong thanks to the clout of farmers in Iowa's first-in-the-nation caucuses. In early 2018, a refiner in Philadelphia filed for bankruptcy, blaming the ethanol mandate. The ethanol industry has pushed back on the Trump administration's plans to weaken the RFS. Congress could end it and force ethanol to compete in the free market by passing legislation to wind down the RFS over 5 years, and some lawmakers have proposed a bill to do just that. If this passed, it would mean cleaner groundwater, cheaper gasoline, and cheaper food.
Countries around the world are struggling with what to do about cryptocurrencies. Some countries want to encourage them, others want to control them, and others want them to just go away. What are the concerns? Well, the UK worries about price volatility and criminal use. US regulators are talking about fraud, unregulated activities, and price bubbles. What appears to underlie the push for regulation is a fear that cryptocurrencies cannot be easily controlled, that they may have impacts that we can't foresee. The fears are well-founded. Cryptocurrencies are really just lines of computer code that can be as variable as coders' imaginations, and those pieces of code are spread across computers around the world. Yet, This is the future of digital markets. People will be engaging in economic relationships that are varied and ever-changing. This is a difficult future for government regulatory systems. They're used to regulating things like bank accounts and stocks, where specialized rules and organizations can be set up. Cryptocurrencies could disrupt this historical approach to regulation.
Over the past generation, tremendous productivity growth has allowed the U.S. dairy farms and processors to become globally competitive. However, despite this growth, outdated policies that are counterproductive to the dairy economy remain in place. Such policies include the 80-year-old Orwellian federal milk marketing orders, a concoction of convoluted U.S. pricing regulations, the selectively protectionist import barriers that suited the old, inefficient U.S. milk industry, and lastly, the recent subsidized margin insurance scheme, which offers periodic payments designed to be highly favorable to small, inefficient farms. This program may become costly, harms lower-cost farms, and adds little to risk management. These programs may benefit some farms and processors, often the least productive, but do so at the expense of taxpayers, consumers, and the broad dairy industry. It is now time to let the U.S. milk producers and processors embrace their global competitiveness and innovate unencumbered by obsolete policy approaches.
If you own cryptocurrency or a coin, you control some numbers on a ledger that's stored on computers all across the world. The ledger contains all the transactions that have ever occurred for that cryptocurrency. You control your coin through a wallet, which is really just software used to engage in transactions. You control your wallet through a private key, a code that is required to transfer coin from your wallet. Your wallet also has a public key that people use to send coin to you. What keeps someone from changing the ledger and stealing your coin? A technology called blockchain. Blockchain incorporates the existing ledger into a code called a hash. If someone tries to steal coin, the hash changes and all the computers that store the ledger cry foul. In fact, every time you engage in a transaction, these computers, called miners, verify the transaction by solving a complex mathematical puzzle that involves the hash. The computer that does this the fastest is rewarded with coin, which keeps the system financially viable.
Ready? In 1923, Mustafa Kemal Ataturk founded Turkey from the ashes of the Ottoman Empire. His goal was to reorient society toward the West. He abolished the caliphate, reformed the legal code, and changed the alphabet. He gave women equal rights and embraced the separation of mosque and state. For decades, the West took Turkey for granted. Turkey was a NATO member and stood firm against communism, terrorism, and Islamism. Turkey was among the first Muslim countries to have a female prime minister. It aspired to EU membership. As a secular democracy, it stood in contrast to most Muslim-majority countries. Recep Tayyip Erdogan changed this. He declared his goal to raise a religious generation. Over 14 years, he curtailed free press and opposition. He Islamized curricula and pushed women from the public sphere. He is the anti-Ataturk. Islam is ascendant. Secularists have been cowed into silence. But is Turkey's change permanent? Some hope that when Erdogan goes, the old Turkey will return. That's wishful thinking. Erdogan has brainwashed a generation, purged the military, and reshaped bureaucracy. Plus, the opposition is incompetent. The good old days are gone. With or without Erdogan, Turkey's going to be a problem for decades to come. "14 years of Erdoganism has transformed Turkey from ally to adversary. What does this mean for the United States? NATO is at risk. The defensive alliance is run by consensus, so a single objection paralyzes it. There is no mechanism to expel wayward members. Even if Erdogan doesn't seek NATO's destruction, Turkey is an intelligence risk. Integrating Russian S-400 missiles would mean exposing NATO secrets to the Kremlin. It gets worse. In fits of pique, Erdogan exposed Israeli spies to Iran and later leaked the location of American forces inside Syria to the Islamic State. What comes next could be even worse. Hakan Fidan, Turkey's intelligence chief, favors Tehran and Moscow over Washington. Turkey is currently a partner on the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, America's next-generation aircraft. Should the Pentagon really trust Turkey not to share the F-35 stealth technology with Russia, Iran, and China? Don't even get me started on Turkey's terror sponsorship. What to do? It's time to stop pretending Turkey is an ally. The best policies are geared to reality, not the fantasy of how things used to be.
South China Sea matters for a number of reasons. Something like $5 trillion of trade passes through the sea each and every year. It's an important route by which Middle Eastern energy supplies make their way to the major Asian economies of China, Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. Put simply, it links major economies together worldwide. But it's become a key focus of U.S. foreign policy in recent years due to a number of maritime territorial disputes that involve a number of governments in the region, including those of China, Taiwan, the Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, and Vietnam. Sometimes Indonesia is thrown into the mix as well. Of particular concern to the United States is the expansive nature of China's claims and the way it's going about asserting them. It has snatched territory from other countries, it's denied foreign fishermen access to their traditional fishing grounds, it's made it much more dangerous for the United States military assets to operate in the region, and it's built artificial islands out of whole cloth. Put simply, it's challenging the freedom of navigation that all countries, including China, have benefited from for decades.
Blockchain is a database of ledgers, or blocks, spread across multiple computers. Each block contains a set of codes called hashes, which keep the blocks in sync. Every time a new entry is introduced, a new hash is created. Once it is verified, the new entry is accepted by all computers. This network of ledgers is what makes blockchain secure. Tampering with just one block or one computer has no effect. For perspectives on this topic, click the links provided.
What explains North Korea's relentless quest for nukes and missiles? These programs are obviously not some bargaining chip, and regime survival is hardly their only purpose. My take, the North Korean regime intends eventually to fight a limited nuclear war in the Korean peninsula and win it. Pyongyang plans confrontations it can win. The North Korean regime is not suicidal. It could not have lasted this long if it were. Its threats and provocations are never sudden impulsive outbursts. They're always carefully planned, rehearsed well in advance. If Pyongyang can force an American president to blink in a future Korean crisis, then the U.S.-South Korean military alliance will collapse. U.S. forces will be out, and the Kim family regime will take a giant step towards settling the still unfinished Korean War on its terms. All the pieces for the North's design are slowly but deliberately falling into place. The nukes, the missiles, the cyber war component. America and her allies must wake up to that design and counter it while there is still time. To learn more about my take on North Korea, check the links in the description below.
Over the past 35 years, North Korea has developed both nuclear weapons and missiles to deliver them. How did this happen? The North Korean nuclear crisis dates back to 1980 when a spy satellite detected nuclear reactor construction north of Pyongyang. In 1992, Secretary of State James Baker won a denuclearization declaration in which both Koreas forswore the work to build a bomb. Still, Pyongyang's plutonium stock surged. Bill Clinton sought to keep North Korea in the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This culminated in the 1994 agreed framework. Pyongyang agreed to abandon its bomb program for reactors and fuel. North Korea later admitted it began cheating almost immediately. Once again, America sought to assuage North Korea with incentives. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice even lifted sanctions. Once again, the North cheated. In 2006, it tested a nuclear bomb. As for Obama, he ignored North Korea to focus on Iran. The problem is North Korea views diplomacy less as a means to peace and more as a way to buy time. Diplomacy is not a religion to be worshipped blindly nor a cost-free option. Indeed, when it comes to Korea, its price may one day be measured in millions of lives.
A rising tide of Islamist militancy in Africa is a growing threat to the US and Europe. There is a dangerous misconception that African militant groups are too locally focused or weak to pose a real danger. Africa is the next front for the Salafi Jihadi movement, a global ideological movement that includes ISIS and Al-Qaeda. African Salafi Jihadi groups provide a local base and source of resilience for these organizations. They are gaining strength not because of ideological resonance, but because the spread of insurgencies and conflict creates opportunities to insinuate themselves in communities. The Trump administration is trying to do more against these groups, with increased raids and drone strikes in places like Somalia. but it has still failed to recognize the link between local conflicts and grievances and the Salafi jihadi movement. These local issues, conflict and poor governance, feel remote and irrelevant to Americans, and the task of resolving them, from Nigeria to Mali to Libya to Somalia, is large. But Americans must understand that addressing these challenges now is far cheaper than fighting yet another war.
Farm businesses have enjoyed exceptionally high prices and incomes over the last 10 years. Even this year, with somewhat lower crop and livestock prices, farm cash incomes are well above their long-run average. In fact, since the early 1980s, households that own and operate farm businesses have consistently enjoyed higher incomes than the average American household. This is not your great-grandmother's poverty-riven Grapes of Wrath farming community. Nevertheless, Congress continues to funnel over $20 billion a year in subsidies to farm businesses. Those payments mainly flow to the largest farm operations, whose owners enjoy incomes in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Many farm subsidy programs also waste scarce economic resources. For example, crop insurance programs encourage farms to adopt high-risk strategies and farm fragile lands. Several conservation subsidies are so poorly targeted that they have almost no impact on the environment. So, is there any justification for continuing most farm subsidy programs? The answer, quite simply, is no.
Breaking up the Yemeni state is better than fighting to keep it together, right? It's an appealing thought and not unprecedented. Yemen used to be two countries, the North and South united in 1990. Southerners started and lost a civil war in 1994, and a secessionist movement reemerged in 2007-2008. And the front line of today's war is along the old North-South border. Redividing Yemen won't bring peace or remove Iran's and al-Qaeda's footprints. In the north, there will be a contest between the former Yemeni president Ali Abdullah Saleh and the Iranian-backed al-Houthi movement. Regardless of who wins, the al-Houthis will keep a statelet in the north, preserving Iran's influence. Who provides much-needed financial support to the north remains an open question. Saudi Arabia won't, and Iran can't. The other half of the country, the south, is far from stable. An ongoing power contest among various factions, including the internationally recognized Yemeni government, will distract from any concerted effort against al-Qaeda. Instead of solving Yemen, breaking up the state just replicates the problems.
Many of the most important questions in public policy are quantitative by nature, and government organizations, such as the Joint Committee on Taxation, the Congressional Budget Office, spend tens of millions of dollars developing computational simulation models to address just those questions. As tax reform heats up, the JCT will predict the revenue and macroeconomic effects of competing proposals to guide Congress and the public. The CBO has had their share of the limelight, estimating the insurance coverage and budgetary effects of healthcare reform. The problem is, the models these teams develop are not available to the public. This undermines the free competition of ideas because the public can't use the models to develop creative, new proposals. It undermines the predictive accuracy of the models because their creators can't participate fully in the scientific community. And it undermines trust in government, because how can the public trust that which resides behind a curtain? Congress could mandate that researchers in government share all of their work openly, and we would have better tax policy, better spending policy, and a healthier democracy. To learn more about open approaches to policymaking and what is possible when models are open, check out the Open Source Policy Center at ospc.org. Also, let us know what other topics you'd like our scholars to cover in 60 seconds. And be sure to subscribe for more videos and research from AEI.
Transnational organized crime represents an acute threat to the United States and to our neighbors in the Western Hemisphere. In Mexico, for example, drug cartels are taking advantage of globalization in order to move their product across borders and to launder the assets through our own financial system. They represent a serious threat to the communities of Mexico, to our border, and to, frankly, our international financial system. There's a narco state in Venezuela that's gradually destroyed the institutions in that country and represents a threat to Venezuela's neighbors and a conduit for drug trafficking to the United States. In Colombia, we have narco guerrillas that operate with virtual impunity over decades and now threaten the ability of people there in Colombia to make peace. The United States can be a partner with all of our neighbors to tackle this problem, to use some asymmetrical tools to freeze their assets, but also build up the capacity of these countries to confront this problem in their own national territory. How do you think the United States should work with its neighbors to confront transnational organized crime? Let us know in your comments, and let us know what other topics you'd like AEI scholars to cover in 60 seconds.
If the government could mandate wages, if the government could set wages and make everybody happy, it wouldn't be the United States that was the most dominant economic power in the world. It would be the Soviet Union.
Andy, thanks so much for being here. Let me just read a brief biography. Andrew F. Puzder was Chief Executive Officer of CKE Restaurants for more than 16 years. For over a decade, he was a commercial trial lawyer in St. Louis. He was nominated by then President-elect Trump to be the U.S. Secretary of Labor. He holds a JD from the Washington University School of Law. We're here today to discuss his book, The Capitalist Comeback, which in its opening week was the #1 Amazon bestseller in economic policy, was the #2 bestseller in the business category, and which was in the top 100 best-selling books on all of Amazon. So congratulations on all that success, and thank you very much for being here.
Well, thanks, Mike. It's my pleasure to be here, and I never get tired of hearing all that good news about the book.
So let's talk about jobs. In the book, you often return to this theme of the benefits that a job can bring, and of course, everybody knows that jobs bring paychecks. But you're talking about something that goes far beyond just a paycheck, and I wonder if you could share your thoughts on that.
Sure. I tell you, the proudest day of my professional career was the day that franchisee who owned the Baskin-Robbins where I worked called me into her office and said, here's the key, you're going to get a 10-cent raise and you can open in the morning. You're now the assistant manager. And I'll tell you, the next morning I went into that Baskin-Robbins, and I'll bet within half an hour it was the cleanest Baskin-Robbins in America. I felt like I had done something, like I owned something, like I was part of something, like I could move forward in life. It's the kind of thing that keeps you out of gangs. It keeps you in school. It keeps you tied to your family. It keeps you shooting for something better and something further down the line. And as I said before, thank God we live in a country where you can keep setting that target down the line and keep moving ahead. My grandfather moved here from Slovakia, where had he stayed there and had I been born, I probably would have died a peasant farmer, somewhere in the Slovakian wilderness. We have this wonderful country where you can do that, and I think those entry-level jobs mean so much for people. Having a job means so much. It's like when your parents give you money versus when you earn money. Now, you actually had to have earned money to know how that feels. But trust me, if you haven't, and I know you have, but for those who haven't, trust me, it's better when you earn it than when you're given it. And the same thing's true when the government's giving you money. It's much better. If you're self-sustaining, you're supporting your family, that's something to be proud of. And having pride and dignity and self-respect is very meaningful. Arthur talks about that at length.
Sure.
Arthur Brooks. And he's right. There's a dignity that comes with this that you just can't replace.
Now, it's common in the discourse about employment today to hear people talk about bad jobs. And you hear that phrase a lot. And you're even seeing some members of the U.S. Senate from the Democratic Party come forward with proposals for guaranteed jobs for all Americans that are quote-unquote good jobs that pay, $15 an hour or whatever. I wonder if you could reflect on the idea that a job can be a bad job.
Yeah, there's no bad jobs. That's just not true. And they would say that a lot about jobs in quick service restaurants like Carl's Jr. and Hardee's. But we've trained America's workforce since the 50s and 60s. You come in, if you're coming out of high school, you can't afford to go to college, you're a working class kid like I was, maybe you're trying to make a few extra dollars. You go into a restaurant and work, and I got to tell you, for the first 2-3 months, I don't care. You can be getting paid $7.25 an hour. That business is losing money on you. Jobs, certain jobs only produce so much economic value. And the government can't mandate that that people are paid more than the economic value the job produces, or the businesses go out of business. If the government could mandate wages, If the government could set wages and make everybody happy, it wouldn't be the United States that was the most dominant economic power in the world. It would be the Soviet Union, which, of course, disappeared. You know, when you look down at North Korea and South Korea at night, it would be North Korea that was lit up and South Korea that was dark. When you look at Venezuela, which, you know, 2011, Bernie Sanders said, you can't find the American dream in America anymore. You have to find it in countries like Venezuela. You know, who's the banana republic now? Well, somebody should ask him today, who's the banana republic now? The people in Venezuela, which when he made that statement was the richest country in South America. The people are starving, they're eating garbage, they can't get medical care. There's a problem with immigrants coming out of Venezuela to all the surrounding countries because they're trying to get themselves and their families out because they're starving to death. You know, this is a terrible situation, and it comes about through these idealistic policies that sound good to anybody who's never had a job and doesn't understand what, or owned a business or signed the front of a paycheck and understand what it takes to make a profit. You know, when you look throughout world history, there's a graph by a guy named Angus Madison, and the Angus Madison Project continued it, and it tracks back to the year zero. So if you're religious, the year that Christ was born, through current times, GDP, gross domestic product per person, and the line is, you know, between like 1 and 2 on a scale of 50 for years and years and years, for centuries and centuries. And then the United States Constitution is signed, and it shoots. It looks literally like a hockey stick. And he also breaks it down by region. And you can see that after World War II, Japan shoots up. Now, Japan was industrialized before World War II, but it was a monarchy. All the money went to the monarchs. So it shoots up. GDP per person goes way up. Western Europe shoots way up after the fall of the National Socialists or the Nazis. When the Soviet Union falls, Eastern Europe shoots way up. When China implements red capitalism, China shoots way up. You know, poverty in China has gone from something like 31%, this is extreme poverty, to down to 2% since 1980 when they implemented red capitalism. These are fantastic numbers. Capitalism has lifted more people from the working and lower classes to the middle class and the upper class than any economic system ever devised. And it's time people started to recognize that and stop trying to hide behind people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, who simply just have no idea what they're talking about.
I appreciate it. So let's talk about some specific policy issues, because you raise a lot of that in the book. You were, again, CEO of a major quick service restaurant chain. The minimum wage legislation directly impacted a large share of your workforce, relative to other industries. What do you think about minimum wage policy?
Look, the minimum wage at $7.25 I thought was too low. I actually argued that you could raise the minimum wage some. I don't think we need a minimum wage. I think it should be either at a municipal or a state level, because quite honestly, you're not going to have the same minimum wage in Seattle as you do in Birmingham, Alabama. That just doesn't make any sense. You know, I mean, Seattle, you've got Amazon, and you've got very large corporations. That's a very wealthy area. In California, San Francisco is thriving and has very low unemployment because of Silicon Valley. But you go to Stockton, just a few miles in, and it was in bankruptcy. But so municipalities are probably the best. Next best would be state. But if we're going to have a federal minimum wage, it's okay to raise it, but don't raise it above the level at which it will destroy entry-level jobs in the lowest economic areas. Because if you do that, you're going to hurt the very economic areas and the very workers that you think you're trying to help. The New York Times had an article in the late 80s that said the minimum wage should go to zero, that its time had come.
The editorial board.
Yeah, the editorial board. I don't know. What's changed economically since the late 80s that would make that, there's nothing that's changed since the late 80s that would make that irrelevant. So I think minimum wage is not something we should be pursuing. I do like the earned income tax credit.
You want to talk about why?
Yeah, it's funny, in California when the minimum wage went up, I think it went to $10 or $11, I can't remember which, but we had workers coming into our general managers in the restaurants and saying, we got to work less hours. Our general managers were stunned. They were like, what do you mean you got to work less hours? You just got to raise. Don't you want to work more hours? And they said, no, man, if I work the hours I'm working now, I'm going to lose my SNAP benefits, my food stamps. I'm going to lose my Section 8 housing. I'm going to lose my Medicaid. It was that welfare cliff where you get to the point where you make a little money, you make some money, and phew, all of a sudden you lose the benefits and you're taking home less money. Earned income tax credit sets a subsidy at a certain level, which would replace these other subsidies, like food stamps and Section 8 and Medicaid. You probably still get Medicaid, but food stamps and Section 8. And as your income increases, your subsidy decreases, but it never decreases so much that you're taking home less when you're earning more. That's the thing to avoid. We always want people that are earning more to take home more. So it comes down, but but it comes down in proportion to how your earnings go up. Now, at some point it disappears because it continually goes down as you earn more, but you never take home fewer dollars as you work. And that's, if you're going to help people, that's how you help people. You don't help them by locking them into poverty. These people that were asking for fewer hours, they were stuck. They couldn't get out of poverty. The chasm between, what they had in poverty and the amount that they'd need to equal that amount was too great to cross. So I think earned income tax credit would be good. We need jobs training. We need significant job training, entrepreneurships, apprenticeships for kids who can't go to college. And look, some people shouldn't go to college. And quite honestly, there's nothing wrong with studying gender studies or philosophy. I majored in history. You can major in those things. But just don't think you're going to get out and get a job. The one poster that made me laugh during the Occupy Wall Street movement was a woman standing there saying, majored in gender studies, $130,000 in debt, no job. I'm thinking, what job did you think you were going to get? It was like, we're at that point we were in a recession too. This is what we were talking about earlier. There just weren't a lot of good paying jobs. So we need to get a little more realism, I think, and with the younger generation. And I think they need to understand the benefits of capitalism versus socialism. But they need jobs. They need to get into the system. They need to get that pride and dignity that comes with work.
So you talk about jobs and the pride and dignity that come with work. A lot of people are worried about technological automation, and they're particularly worried about that in industries like the quick service food industry. Are you worried about the robots taking all the jobs? How do you see automation affecting the labor market?
It's funny. I'm going to take this into a little bigger context, but I'll answer it in the context of the Obama administration's economic policies, which coming out of a recession, the average would have been about 4% GDP growth. It never got much above 2%. He never had a full year of 3%. So people never really got good paying jobs in the Obama administration. And I would do interviews and we would talk about, well, Andy, people can't find jobs. The labor participation rate's going down because they're dropping out and they're working part-time jobs and entry-level jobs in your restaurants and trying to feed their families, and people are coming in and automating in manufacturing and in your restaurants, and the jobs are disappearing. And then President Trump comes in, and the reason, of course, was that businesses weren't investing in creating jobs because they were afraid of policies like Dodd-Frank, which killed community banks, and Obamacare, which shoved medical insurance expense down on businesses. And then there was this onslaught of regulation that you never knew the next crazy thing they were going to come up with. When President Trump got elected, optimism shot up like a rocket, and businesses began to invest. And then he cut taxes and cut regulation. And what we found is now we're in a position where after 16 months, just 16 months of his presidency, or 16 months since the election, it hasn't even been 16 months since presidency, I think it's been 15 months, we've got fewer people on unemployment benefits than has been the case in 44 years when the labor force was much smaller. So that's an incredible number. We have more people working than we've ever had working, and we have more job openings than we ever had. Just think about that. More people working and more job openings than we've ever had, and the unemployment rate at a 17-year low. Hasn't been this low since the Clinton administration. All the talk about automation, we have 400,000 job openings in manufacturing and 250,000 in construction. Everybody's hiring. Everybody wants employees. We've actually gone from an economy where the biggest problem was workers couldn't find good paying jobs to an economy where the big problem is employers can't find enough workers to fill the good paying jobs that exist. So automation was an excuse, just like every other excuse that they tried to come up with to explain why despite all the geniuses in the Obama administration, they never managed to get above, 2.1% GDP growth. His last year in office, it was 1.5% GDP growth. So you had people like Larry Summers, who's a very highly respected economist, out there saying, well, believing Trump, the Trump administration was projecting 3% GDP growth. He was out there saying, no, he said, believing in that's like believing in tooth fairies. Literally, said that last May, so a year ago. Jason Furman, another famous Obama economist, said, no, we're 2% GDP growth for the next 10 years. Trying to explain that the reason that their economic policies failed must have been systemic. They're kind of circling the wagon. It was automation, it was people, it was baby boomers getting older. So first 3 quarters under President Trump, 3.1% GDP growth. CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, which is actually kind of a Keynesian group. I'm a little surprised by this, but they came out and projected 3.3% for next year and credited the tax cuts. Now, after that, they project 1.9% GDP growth, which is, between you and me, is just ridiculous. How could you have, with the tax cuts and regulatory relief, all energy policy, all these things that encourage business, they're actually projecting that we'll have lower GDP growth than we had under Obama when he was doing everything he possibly could to discourage business growth. So those numbers don't make any sense. But I think for this year, they may have hit the nail on the head, and they even credit the tax cuts. The only year where they credit them, but they do credit it. So I think we're looking at the Trump boom, and it's a result of the capitalist comeback.
Hi everyone, thanks for watching part 1 of our discussion with Andrew Puzder. I hope you enjoyed what you saw. Remember to like the video or leave us a comment. And if you want to see more, check out part 2. Hi everyone, this is part 2 of our discussion with Andrew Puzder. It picks up right where we left off in part 1. Welcome back.
I think we're looking at the Trump boom, and it's a result of the capitalist comeback.
And a lot of that you think is what you should buy, go out and buy.
Yes, go out and buy, exactly.
And you think a lot of that, certainly there's the tax cut, but some of the effects that you're talking about kicked in before the tax cut was signed into law, and you think a lot of that is what you might call investor confidence or just kind of a new spirit of risk-taking that took hold in boardrooms and among investors.
I asked, I did run a very big company, but it was made up of a lot of little companies because we had, our franchisees owned 95% of the restaurants, and everything internationally was franchised. So I was in touch with these people after the election, and I went and asked some of them, I say, what do you think's different now? What's your feeling? And to kind of give a synopsis of their answers, it was, we're not waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering, what the next big government program is going to be. Are they going to kill more community banks like they with Dodd-Frank? Are they going to shove, health insurance costs down our throats? Is there going to be some new regulation coming? We're not waking up and thinking. We're actually thinking maybe it's time to invest. And that was before President Trump lived up to his promises to cut regulations and to cut taxes. Once he lived up to them, I think we're looking at a very, very bright future economically.
So let me zero in on some labor market issues that come kind of right out of the book. In the book, you state that policy should be focused on helping people in high risk and in minority communities located in large cities to find jobs.
Yes.
And you highlight that as a key priority. How would we go about doing that? And I guess also, why do you think it's so important?
Well, I think it's important because we want, like I said, the proudest day of my career was when I got that 10-cent raise, which really was meaningless to me. I got that promotion to assistant manager, and they handed me the key. That's the kind of dignity and self-respect that would keep these kids in the inner cities out of trouble. And I think it's an important experience for them. I think it's difficult to work these jobs in the inner city. Companies don't even want to open in the inner city. So we need to encourage companies to open there. We need to try and make sure that kids get training. And it doesn't have to be college. It doesn't have to be some fancy apprenticeship or internship. It can just be getting kids into those entry-level jobs so they understand what it is to make a living and what it is to be a part of a team or to deal with customers. And we also need to fix the education system. A big part of this is fixing the education system in cities like Chicago. It's a terrible system. I think they're more politically motivated than they are to motivate, than they are to educate the kids in that city. And part of it's growing out of the labor unions, the teachers' unions that control many of the school systems, and their deep roots in socialism. Kids are not being taught what they need to learn to get out and contribute in our society. They're not being taught to respect the opportunities that they had, the opportunities that millions of immigrants came to this country to take advantage of. They're here. But we have to make sure that there's an equal playing field so everybody has a chance to take advantage of those opportunities. And I think some government focus in the inner cities to bring that about is warranted.
And one of the kind of vehicles of opportunity that you talk about are apprenticeships.
Yes.
And I wonder if you could say a little about why you are so high on apprenticeships, why you think there's so much potential there to help people.
Because not every kid can go to college. Some of them could learn skills. Right now, if you want to work in manufacturing, when I was a kid, if you wanted to get a job at I was in Cleveland, Ohio. There was a lot of manufacturing there. There was manufacturing in close by Detroit and Youngstown and Akron. You could go get a job in a factory, and within a couple of weeks, you could be productive because the tasks were simple. They were assembly line type tasks. Well, those days are gone. Now this is all automated. And so you can still get a job in a factory. As I said, there's like 400,000 openings in the manufacturing sector, but you need the training. You need to learn how to run those machines. And it's not something you should have to go to college to do. It's something that you should be able to do within the business. As Secretary of Labor, one thing I wanted to do was work very closely with the business community on jobs training, because the business community knows what jobs are open. They know what skills they need. So when the federal government, I think the federal government spends something like $30 billion a year on training, and really we should be doing that in conjunction with the private sector spends like 300. So maybe it's 30. It's not 30 million. It's 30 billion. It's either 30 million or 30 billion. I'm confused at the moment. But the private sector spends much more. We should spend with them so that we can have better job training, which was more effective, and got people into jobs that exist, not jobs that the government would like to pretend exist.
Because the businesses know what skills they need. They know what
the openings are. They know what they need. Why should we be training people to do something else?
So one of the reasons why some people are excited about apprenticeships is that businesses used to be much more willing to invest in that kind of training than they've become, and this is seen as a way to kind of encourage businesses to spend more money and more time hiring workers with general skills and then training them in specific skills.
Well, businesses are going to have to start doing that because there's a shortage of employees now. There's too many jobs. Over the Obama administration years, businesses could be very picky about who they hired and who they trained because everybody was looking for jobs. We in the quick service restaurant industry, we had people that were clearly overqualified for the positions that they were filling, but that's the only jobs they could find. That's changing now. That's changing to where we've got large businesses competing for qualified employees and needing to train people to be qualified employees because there aren't enough of them. So this is a very exciting time for employees.
Yeah. So a hot economy is making businesses do things that they wouldn't do when they can be more selective.
Yes, and this will reduce income inequality. It will drive up wages as employers compete for employees. It's a supply and demand, just like anything else. When the supply of laborers is low and the demand for laborers is high, the value, the compensation for laborers will go up. It's Kennedy's rising tide, economic tide that lifts all boats, and that we are experiencing that. I wish there were still Democrats who believed it. It's too bad we're not the party of John Kennedy. It's too bad we're the party of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
And one of the things that you're seeing businesses do, at least anecdotally, because this is all relatively recent, is turning to hiring people with criminal records when they otherwise might not have done that. Do you have any thoughts about how to ease the transition from people who had committed felonies, had served prison time, but who were out and who were ready to work and who want to work, and ways to kind of ease that transition into the workforce and into productive lives?
Well, again, I would do it working with businesses who need employees, and you have to be very careful what you do in those circumstances. But we don't, we want to get the recidivist rate down. We don't want people going back to jail. We could have training in the prisons, which I think would be very helpful. And there's already a lot of that. But with the demand for employees increasing, it's something that we could certainly step up. So there are a lot of things we could do. There are people who've made mistakes in life, and they need a second chance, and they need to be part of the incredible American dream, the incredible American economic system that we have. That for some reason some people want to denigrate. I'm not. It's a mentality I just can't understand. I mean, all of the evidence goes against them, and yet they persist.
Let me quote from the book, because this stood out to me. You said, "A priority of mine reflected my own experience. I got married and had a family at a young age. I felt that workplace policies should better reflect the needs of young families, and that there was a role for government to push in that direction."
Yes, I think there is.
And can you just say a little more about that?
Sure. What you can't do is overwhelm businesses. In other words, you can't, raise the taxes, increase regulation, increase the minimum wage, require them to provide daycare, require maternity leave, require paternity leave. You can't keep piling on. But if you give businesses relief, there's probably some things you could do to encourage them to implement some of these policies. And I think making sure that women are treated fairly in the workplace, which is, it's difficult because women obviously have children, and we have to adjust for that. And to try and make sure that people who have children aren't punished for having children. There are policies that we could push forth in those respects if we give businesses some relief so they can otherwise make money and stay in business and keep providing jobs. I've never been an opponent of all regulation. I think regulation's important. Now, people need to understand a regulation is a tax. I mean, you pay for whatever regulations are out there. But I just wish that the government would try and design regulations so that it takes into consideration the concerns of businesses. And that was a big push of mine over the years of the Obama administration. It often fell on deaf ears, but I kept pushing it in different sectors, and hopefully this is something that will come about, because this regulatory state's out of control. It's a fourth branch of government that rules on its own, and we can't. President Trump's been in office for over a year. He can't even get the people he wanted into the regulatory state to get things changed. So it's become a behemoth, and I think by progressive design. So we need to take it down.
So let me ask you about a point that you just made. It ties into the book. You're clear in the book on the need for workers to have strong protections, and you make that point. What sorts of protections do you think workers need? Why do you think they're necessary? And why do you think the current protections are not doing the trick?
Well, I think the current protections are pretty good. I think that we could probably do better than we're doing. You always can, and I'd like to see something with respect to child care, and I'd like to see something that made it easier for women in the workplace. But look, the unions used to take this role. The unions at one time took responsibility for protecting workers. Beginning in the Roosevelt administration, they ceded that authority to the federal government, whether it's the Wage and Hour Division, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, OSHA. I mean, there's any number of acronyms of organizations or agencies in the federal government that now protect workers, because the unions have kind of ceded their responsibility. They're no longer the protectors of American workers. That's now the government. And in fact, they've lost touch with American workers. And I'm not saying that unions weren't relevant in the last century. Who wanted 10-year-old kids working in coal mines? Well, nobody did. But even that, they've ceded that authority to the government. And so they now are out there trying to establish their relevance and grow their membership through the government. That's why they end up supporting ridiculous things like a $15 minimum wage that actually hurts the very employees that they claim they're trying to help by eliminating their jobs. The studies out of San Francisco and Seattle show that businesses close when the wages go up, and in Seattle it showed that the wages declined because they had hours reduced. So it's those kind of ridiculous policies, and the union members know that big labor is not in touch with their needs. And I think the best example of that is the last election, where despite putting over $100 million into the Hillary Clinton campaign coffers, the 42% of union households voted for Donald Trump. But what's more interesting is that includes government employee unions, and they want big government. You know, government employees want more money into government. If you just look at the private sector workers, it was more like 60% voted for Donald Trump despite the position of the labor leaders. Now, how out of touch could you possibly be with your membership? And you see this throughout the Southeast, where UAW can't unionize a car manufacturing plant. The factories reject them over and over and over. Boeing the workers just rejected a union a couple years ago in South Carolina. So the unions have kind of ceded this authority to the government. So I think the government needs to step up and make sure that there isn't discrimination in the workplace. I think that's appropriate. You know, child labor laws are obviously important. Laws that protect people in the workplace are important. Now, you don't want to go overboard. I mean, the safety people at our company used to say that the perfect restaurant for safety purposes was one that never opened. You know, and we don't want to get to the point where we're doing that. But I think government has a role in protecting workers, and I think it has a role in advocating for the interests of American workers.
So would you be in favor of stronger unions?
Well, I would be in favor of stronger unions if they became more in touch with the interest of their workers and less in touch with the interest of the big labor leaders. I think for example, in this last election, you know, look, the candidate of the private sector union members was Donald Trump. He was their candidate on immigration. He was their candidate on trade. Yet they supported Hillary Clinton because she was the candidate of big government, which justifies the labor leaders' existence, because that's how they accomplish things now. They get legislation. They really can't do it on their own.
So let me touch on international trade, because you bring that up, and I'm going to quote from the book. You write, "Free trade can benefit everybody, but it is important to negotiate better trade deals with an eye toward protecting the working class from the pain those deals can bring." Yeah. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. If you're and I'll even tie it into immigration. If you're working at a manufacturing plant in Indiana, and it closes because it moves to Mexico, and you go to try and get a job in construction, and nobody speaks English, you know, try and convince that worker, and you know, maybe your dad worked in that plant, your grandfather. Try and convince that worker that, you know, free trade and liberal immigration policies are working in his best interest. You can't convince him of that because they're not working in his best interest. I think the important thing with international trade is that we have free trade, but that it's also fair trade. I don't think unfair trade is free trade. You know, when we're paying a 25% tariff to sell an automobile in China, and they're paying a 2.5% tariff to sell one in the United States, that's not free trade. When we're paying a 10% tariff to sell Fords in Germany or anywhere in the European Union, and they're paying 2.5% to sell, you know, Saabs and Mercedes and BMWs in the United States, that's not fair. That's not free trade, because it's not fair trade. We've got a president now who has stood up and said, you know what, if you guys don't start playing fair, we're going to start protecting ourselves. Now, it's different to impose tariffs because you want to protect failing American businesses than it is to use tariffs as a negotiating tool to get people to the table so that you can enter into free trade agreements that are fair trade agreements. I think the best example is what happened recently in South Korea, where we had an agreement in 2011 or 12. Since then, our trade deficit increased like $31 billion a year. And the deficit on automobiles in trade increased $33 billion a year. So the problem was obviously automobiles. So the president went in and had his team negotiate a deal where they doubled the amount of automobiles that we could import to South Korea without a tariff. Now, some people said, oh, we weren't importing that many automobiles to Korea anyway. Well, of course we wouldn't. We weren't, because if you're not going to advertise You're not going to spend marketing dollars and try and design cars that meet the needs of South Korean people if your profits are capped. I mean, you can only spend so much. Now, if you double the cap, well, now maybe you'll invest. Now maybe you can sell some cars in that country. But now that didn't stop South Korea from selling cars in the United States. It just opened the South Korea market to our car manufacturers. That's free trade. It isn't free trade when they keep us out and we let them in. So I think that's what I'm talking about. There are things we can do to try and make that, or NAFTA. You want to know the president's philosophy on negotiating. Pretend you're the guy who's negotiating with Canada and Mexico right now. And the president comes out and says, we're going to put tariffs on steel and aluminum. Now, there are national defense issues with those tariffs, so they're a little different than other tariffs. But let's pretend they're not different. And really, there aren't national defense concerns really with Canada and Mexico. So you go in and you're negotiating, and all of a sudden the Canadians and Mexicans go crazy. God, you're going to put tariffs on steel and aluminum that we import to your country, or export to your country. And the president comes out and says, tell you what, during the negotiations, we're not going to impose those tariffs. Now, if you were the guy negotiating with Mexico and China, do you think you were in a stronger negotiating position or a weaker negotiating position before the president made those statements? Well, obviously, now you're in a stronger negotiating position. You've really got China and Mexico a little concerned that there could be real problems if they don't negotiate on this NAFTA deal. So this is the kind of thing I think that scares people in the academic ivory towers, or scares journalists who have never really negotiated a deal. But I think American businesses are kind of laughing and going, this guy knows what he's doing. I think we're going to make some progress here.
And you think it'll be effective? You think
I think it'll be look, it's already brought China to the table. Everybody got, about a week ago, Xi Jinping came out and said, I guess maybe we do need to look into this taking your intellectual property and these tariffs and this kind of thing. And of course, the left media all came out and said, oh my God, he would have done that anyway. And that's what they said about the Soviet Union under Reagan, would have fallen anyway. Anyway, they come out and say this, he would have done this anyway, and this doesn't mean that much. I'll tell you what it meant. It wasn't the individual things he said. What he said through that speech, through referring to those individual things, was, I'm at the table. Now you got me at the table. And that was the point. We need to have these people at the table. You've got three presidents, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, who tried to get China to negotiate. Look, what you're doing is unfair. You're cheating us. We're going to go to the World Trade Organization. This isn't right. We're a big trading partner. And they went home and laughed. And now maybe they're not laughing. Now maybe it's time to cut a deal with China that doesn't eliminate free trade, but makes it fair trade.
Andy Puzder, thank you very much for being here. Congratulations.
I hope people weren't taking notes, because it's all in the book. You can get the book, and you can go through, and I hope people will get the book. And it is designed to give people ammunition to defend this president's policies, and also so they can share with others these kind of undercovered economic achievements. I'm tired of hearing about Stormy Daniels. I want to hear more about how fewer people are on the unemployment rolls than have been on them in 44 years, or that North Korea is coming to the negotiating table. But all of this is in the book, and if you read it, after you read it, if you buy the book and you read it, please give it to your kids and give it to your grandkids, people that are in high school and college, because I guarantee you they're not learning this stuff in high school and college.
And congratulations on all the success it's had.
Thank you so much.
And just a reminder again that all the profits are going to charity and to some worthy causes. So thank you again for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hi, everyone. That's the end of our discussion with Andrew Puzder. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw, remember to like the video or leave us a comment. And be sure to check out the rest of our videos and research from AEI.